But some of you may be thinking, but this doesn't look like a war hero. Yeah, he's an ordinary guy, a little guy, and, well, quite a good deal older than I was when I looked a little different.
To see Mr. Robert Max, who has graciously come to talk about his war experience, very unusual experience, as he was an American soldier captured by the Nazis in World War II. And he has an incredible story to tell. His book was just recently published, and we have copies for sale in the back if you want to buy them. We also have a copy in the library that you can check out. And if you have any questions after, Mr. Max would be glad to answer them, and we would be glad to hear them.
As Rebecca had just told you, I was an American soldier, an American Jewish soldier in World War II. You'll recall December 7, 1941, when the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor, the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii was a territory of the U.S. and later became our 59th state. With that strike, we suddenly found ourselves in the war. Remember, the First World War that we were still living through was the war to end all wars. Just didn't quite happen that way. What is not as well known was that it was 4 days later, Adolf Hitler declared war in America. So here we were, a nation essentially of isolationists. We had enough with World War I, and we were living through the Depression, and the country was not really ready for war yet. A very convincing President, Franklin Roosevelt, in his fireside messages on radio, before television, ultimately inspired the nation, and we went to war. When I say we went to war, everybody in America went to war. I'm on occasion questioned about what the people were like during that period. And I remember I was in a debate on a television program with a colonel from the Korean War. The interviewer was very, very sharp. She said, "Colonel, you just heard what Mr. Max said about the people, the population, the Americans during World War II. Do you think this nation could ever rise to that occasion again?" And with a twinkle in her eye, she looked at me, and she knew there would be a response, because he would say, "Of course," which he did. And then she looked and waved me on, and I said, "I could only hope so, but I can never imagine that any people could ever rise to the occasion, one in which virtually every American wanted some role either on the home front or on the battlefield." So that was the environment in which we went to war. At the time, I was in my second year at Ohio University, a small university in Athens, Ohio. And at night, I lived in a fraternity house with 20 other young men. And before going to bed, we had these late night bull sessions. Well, gradually they turned to the war. And as the discussions wore on, we seemed to be convincing one another, what are we doing here? We're engaged in war. We're eligible. And here we are, having a great time on a nice campus in a lovely fraternity house. We became convinced, 100%, and we decided to close down the fraternity house and go to war. And that's what we did. I came back to South Orange, New Jersey, was ushered into the war at Fort Dix. Somehow they discovered that I played a saxophone and a clarinet. And over maybe 4 days into my time there, they discovered that. They called me into the office. Kid, we're sending you home, a weekend pass. Understand you play clarinet, saxophone? We need one here. They had a large swing band then. And the band was led by Jack Leonard. Jack Leonard. Some of you may know the swing bands of that period had 13, 16, 17 pieces. And a vocalist, a male and a female vocalist. Jack Leonard was the vocalist with the Tommy Dorsey Swing Band just before Frank Sinatra came on the scene. That was his first major role as the vocalist for the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. Anyway, Jack says, I got your weekend pass, and go home, come back with the instruments, you're going to be in the swing band. I came, I did come back, my first rehearsal, I looked around, these were all the top professionals in their day. And I said, my God, some of them studied at Juilliard, they do orchestration, arranging, and they were really skilled. My heroes. I was intimidated, but nevertheless, I hung in there for a while. My name was then posted to be shipped out to basic training, ultimately leading to combat. Jack Leonard pulled some strings and got me relieved, essentially relieved from duty. I could stay with the band. I had just turned 20. I saw my buddies shipping out, and I said, someday I'll look back and I'll be sorry. And I fought. I had to fight to get my name installed again, and so I was. And I did ship out. And I went to a number of training camps, basic training, and then combat training around the country, and then shipped out from Fort Meade, Maryland, shipped out. I was ready for overseas duty, where I wanted to fight, and that was in Europe, against Adolf Hitler, who was killing so many, ultimately 6 million Jews. And that was emotionally stirring in me, and I was hoping I would go there, and that's where I did go. So I shipped out on a beautiful ocean liner, the SS Mauritania, the UN, the RSS, Royal Steamship, Mauritania, and landed in Liverpool, England, took 2 boats across the English Channel and landed on Omaha Beach. Climbed the mountains there, saw the destruction still remaining from D-Day, and recognized that I had been assigned to an armored division in the 6th Armored Division in General George Patton's 3rd Army. I fought in 3 campaigns across Europe. The 3rd was called the Ardennes Campaign, logically because it was fought in the Ardennes Forest, which was in southwestern Belgium, just over the German border. On December 16, 1944, the Germans, with their backs to the wall, British and American forces had driven them as far as they were going to go. With very, very good strategy, they struck against the American and British forces. It was a very, very successful strike. Good strategy. Our troops were in total disarray. At the end of that day, my name was placed on a list as missing in action. The War Department put lists out and was sent around the area there. A telegram was sent to my parents saying that your son had been reported missing in action. If there is further news, we will let you know. Days went by, weeks went by, there was no further news. I learned much later that my parents assumed that I had been killed. In another unit, another division, American division, in that battle zone, there was a radio operator. Actually, he was company clerk, but he also ran the radio for that unit. And he saw my name on the list. That night, he sat down and he wrote a letter and sent it to my parents. This is the original letter written on the battlefield. And my mother was a great saver. She saved this letter. It's the original. You can see the white paper has turned brown, and there's some cracks in it. But to me, it's exceedingly valuable. Yeah. Thank you. This letter. Well, you were close enough. You didn't see. You didn't know. The letter is dated Germany, April 26, 1945. It is signed Lester. I was not dead. I was not even missing. I will come back to that later. I'd been on the line for several days. I was ordered to the rear for a little rest and some food. And on the way back, I heard a call for volunteers. One of the very first things I heard in basic training, one thing you never do in the Army, volunteer. Some instinct drove me to volunteer, so I did. I went to where the voice was coming from, and apparently what they needed was a troop to reconnoiter the battle area, to discover where the troops were aligned, British troops, American troops, German troops. Commanders could not develop battle strategy without that knowledge. And so I saw a Jeep in the distance. I loved the idea of driving a Jeep. I raced to that Jeep. The key was in it. And I signaled to others. 5 others came and joined me. They hopped out in the back of the Jeep. We took off. I had no idea where we were going, but I know I had to go in that direction. That's where the enemy is. Go there. And I started driving. Along the way, we round a corner, and suddenly I see an 88, what I discovered later on, was an 88 millimeter cannon about 10 to 15 yards in front of us, pointed right at us. I wondered then, I wondered for months afterward, and I still do wonder, why nobody in that tank pulled the trigger. We wouldn't be having this session tonight had they done so. I jammed the brake on, we skidded off the road, we could go no further. And suddenly, small arms fire come pouring in from the right. Rifles, machine guns. We had to seek shelter. I saw in the distance, it was a shack. I said, we can at least defend ourselves there. One of the men was bright, so knew that we were going to defend ourselves. We're going to need, there's a machine gun here. He unfastened it and took it with us. We raced toward the shack. One of the men was hit and killed on the way over. We got in that shack. There were now 5 of us left. And the man who took the machine gun sets it up in a window. It's a big bay window, totally exposed. As fate would have it, he was hit very, very shortly thereafter. You do things in battle, I guess they called it battle readiness, and you operate often on instinct alone. And instinct just drove me to that machine gun. If I reasoned, I would have said, it's too great a risk. You'll be hit. But I hopped back to that machine gun. I fired, and I kept firing through the day. And did hit many. I saw helmets. Whenever I saw one I fired. They hit many, and they were later killed some of them. Late in the afternoon, I began to realize that we were running out of ammunition. There was a cold chill that went through my body. And sure enough, we did run out of ammunition. I learned later that the troops we were fighting were about 150, between 100 and 150 German soldiers. We started out with the 6, 1 was killed on the way, so there were 5 of us. We managed to hold them off for the whole day until we ran out of ammunition. We had to do something. Otherwise, they'll massacre us, probably. They were not taking prisoners anymore. I saw a trapdoor in the floor of this little shack. I said, if there's a trapdoor, there's got to be a cellar. We'll do. Take the two wounded. There were two wounded with us. There were three able-bodied. And we'll climb in that cellar. Under the cover of darkness, we'll come out. We'll infiltrate through the German lines. Natural. The only problem was, the Germans came in, and they heard moaning. We had two wounded soldiers. And so they banged on the door. I opened that door. The sight then was almost as visible today. There's some sights that you get embedded in your mind. I looked up, and there were 8 automatic black guns pointed right at my face. And behind each of those guns was a camouflaged German soldier, white, against the snow. And that black gun against the white camouflage was so stark. The motion up. They took the others away. The German sergeant put his rifle in my back, a barrel, and pushed me out, across the road where we were fighting, over to their territory. And I saw loads and loads of foxholes and soldiers in each of them. Some of them were guards, some of them were regular soldiers. Just then, heavy artillery started to pour in, British or American. And it was a treed area, so those shells were hitting the trees and shrapnel was falling on the ground. The German sergeant jumps into his bunker. I try to crawl in, puts his rifle against my chest. Nine. I try to talk with him. I'm wondering. I knew that the order had been issued by high command that there are no more Allied prisoners to be taken alive. And I expected him to try to shoot me. I said, what will you do with me? I thought he might understand the gestures and all that. One of the things I discovered early on, you can best survive with luck. You have to have elements of luck. Luck number one, this German, in almost perfect English, responds, "We have to kill you." Not the response I would have liked, but it was in English, and I recognized that. There was no way of escaping. I had run track in high school, and this was my time to really use all that experience. There was no place to run. There were guards all over the place. And so he says, we have to kill you. The only thing I had left was, with the good fortune that he spoke English, was conversation. And so we started to talk. Why are you Americans here? This is not your war. He said, you made it our war. And the conversation goes on. The guttural tones of his native tongue start to change as he's speaking English. They get less threatening. And suddenly I realized we're talking almost like comrades. He looks up and he says, you fought well. He respects valor. You fought well today. You killed many of our men, but you fought well. And the conversation goes on. He said, next year, we will be in we're going to be in that big city of yours. He was a good Nazi. He believed Hitler's Mein Kampf, his conquest of the world, and his plan for doing it, which included America. And he planned to go to New York City with his family. He reaches down into his pocket. He's just said, we have to kill you. I assumed he was a non-commissioned officer. He probably had a pistol. And instead of using a rifle, he pulled a pistol out. Instead, he pulls out a wallet. We're on a battlefield. Shells are still landing all around. We have to talk over or between the showings. And he opens his wallet, he shows me a picture of his family. There's a wife, a son, and a daughter. The son is obviously a teenager. And he looks at the wallet, he looks at the picture, and he looks up at me, and he looks back at the picture, and he looks again. His son had blue eyes and blonde hair. I had blue eyes and light brown hair. I never did learn from him the rationale, but I always assumed that what happened was that he looked at his son, and therefore the grace of, instead of standing Miss American, it could be my son. And for that reason, he then said, "No, for you the war is over. I'm going to send you to a prisoner of war camp." He was saving my life. And he knew that I knew, in a prisoner of war camp, because the Germans did recognize the Geneva Conventions, I would get shelter, warmth, a bed, food, toilet facilities. I would have all of that. He called over 2 guards. They took me away. They were stopped along the way by what appeared to be a German officer. There was conversation that went on. They then changed course, and they took me in another direction. It soon became obvious to me I was not going to a prisoner of war camp. I came to an assemblage of lots of troops, different I saw some American uniforms, but there were other uniforms. The tops were either dark blue or black. I didn't recognize them. As I learned later, they were German captives of Eastern European nations that had joined the war and the Russians. And there was just a mass of them. I was thrown into that mass. There were no formalities. They didn't ask to see dog tags. They didn't ask my name. They didn't give me a name. I didn't even get a number. 2 of the guards came up. One of them pulled off my gloves. This was winter. Pushed back my coat, my winter coat. The other guard pulled the coat off. So there it was, without gloves or a winter coat. They then motioned, forced march. They started marching us. In a little while, it started to turn dark. And they pointed the rifles down. Lie down, lie down. They uttered some words in German I didn't understand at the time, but the motion was clear enough. You had to lie down. They wouldn't let us lie down close to one another, where we might get some warmth. And instead, we had to lie down in a line. The road was covered with snow and ice. I didn't have any winter clothes. I learned sometime later that the temperature during that period was between 0 and 5 degrees Fahrenheit. I was told it was a record cold for Germany. For the next 82 out of 90 nights, that is where I say slept. I didn't sleep most of the nights I didn't sleep. And it went on that way. We were into forced marches. We were slave laborers. So we had to do slave labor. We didn't know yet what that labor was going to be. We were getting virtually no food. In the morning, they would throw some scraps of bread, hard brown, hard-crusted bread that was almost inedible. That was what we got for the day. If we were lucky, later in the day, they would give us cans, not canteens, but just cans, like Campbell soup cans, and they had hot water. If we were lucky, some days there would be a little piece of potato in the bottom. That was generosity on their part. That went on and on. At nights, I would lie there, and as time wore on, bodily deterioration started to set in. And I could feel it. It was getting tougher and tougher. Each step was laborious. I could feel the pain in my stomach. We had already lost some men. Starvation was taking its toll. The combination of starvation and exposure was taking its toll. The only thing I had going, I did think of death so often. I thought about it. I had to say, maybe I could develop some mental stability, emotional stability. And so I thought about things at night when I lay awake. I thought about food. I thought about the wonderful food my mother used to make. And if someday one or two things will happen, either the war will end or maybe I can escape. I thought of these foods. They became very, very real. I could see them, I could smell them, I could taste them. And that emotionally kept me going. Months later, when I was hospitalized, I asked a nurse to give me something to write on. And she brought me what I call my little brown book. And in this book, I recorded there are 84 different foods listed in this little brown book. I can tell you two. Well, in the other side of the book, I had contracted, I'm jumping ahead, but I had contracted some 26 illnesses, diseases, and fevers, and injuries. They're all recorded in this book too. So maybe later you might want to just take a look at the little brown book. And this was going on and on, but remember, we were laborers, forced laborers. What did we have to repair? The railroads that were being bombed by German and by English and American planes. At night, we had to carry railroad tracks. Now, mind you, this sometime after we had been captured, and the bones were starting to protrude. We had to put those railroad tracks on our shoulders and carry them sometimes miles from one town to another. These were railroad tracks that the Germans brought up to replace those that were damaged through the shelling. And that was very, I don't have to tell you how difficult. You could imagine. You're weak to begin with, and you're carrying these railroad tracks on these shoulders with very little flesh. But that we had to do. If you didn't, and some did drop out, some were kicked off to the side of the road, died, and some were shot, depending upon the nature of the German guards who happened to be near you at the time. To fix the railroads, we didn't want to, but there were guards all around. We were not allowed to talk to one another, the prisoners. Not even, if you turn, you looked like you were trying to make contact with somebody, they might shoot you, and they did shoot some. There were some people there, some smart people, who knew something, had either imagination or knew something about railroads. When we started putting the dirt back into those caverns that came from the shelling, we put them, they did it in a certain way so that that ground wasn't solid. And you knew very well that if a train came by, the wheels would sink in, the track would sink lower. Those trains were taking supplies to the German soldiers that we were fighting. So that meant a lot to us. I don't know how, I don't remember how we learned that, but that's what somebody told us. So we didn't put the filling in right. Some of the men knew how to make the tracks look like they were touching one another, looked like the pins were in the right place, and it was safe. The people who inspected the work were the German guards. They didn't know anything about railroads. But the satisfaction is hard to describe. And all this torture that we're going through, we had such great satisfaction over realizing that we had done one thing positive. We had sabotaged the railroads. And it was a feeling that was left with us for a while. Now, the American and British forces were driving the Germans back. They had to move us faster. I suspect that most, maybe all of you, have seen either the originals or you've seen pictures of the cattle cars that took Jews and others to the concentration camps. They were bare cars. They lined us up started pushing us in. Just push, push, with the rifle barrels in the back, and we're packed, body against body. There was no room to sit, and we were just packed in there, like in a meat warehouse. The car should have held 40 humans sitting. I counted at one point, 75, 80 or so. There was no room to sit. Those who tried to sit had bodies tumbling over them. It was very, very difficult. Each morning the door would slide open. They'd throw in some scraps of bread. We were very weak by that time. We couldn't inflict harm on one another, but we did crawl to that bread. If you were lucky to get any, you threw it in your mouth immediately. We had become a pack of animals. We had no toilet facilities. We used our helmets. There were no light, no windows. That went on for 6 days and nights. Some men did die there. Some went out of their minds. At the end of the 6 days, they pulled us out. Sometime earlier, in a forced march, my right foot became so inflamed from frostbite that the pain was incredible. It didn't fit in the shoe anymore. I wanted to scream. If I had screamed, I would have been shot immediately for making that kind of a noise. And I sustained myself for a while. Again, luck. They stopped us. They had us sit down. That gave me an opportunity to take the shoe off. I had to hide it. If they ever found an empty shoe there, they would look for the person, and whatever they wanted, damage they wanted to inflict on me, they would. We got up. The only winter garment I had left was a scarf. I took the scarf, wrapped it around the right foot. We got up and started to march again. I knew, and I decided, now's the time. You're not going to march anymore. Now's the time. You must escape. The way the guards were spaced was such that if we rounded a curve a certain way, we would not be visible to a guard. There were 2 other American soldiers near me, and I signaled to them that we were going to make a break. And when we came to that kind of a spot in the road, I did signal, and the 3 of us just threw our bodies over some, looked like a hedgerow of some sort. Our bodies. We lay there. The fact that the German guards never came back to look for us suggested to me that the troops that remained must have closed ranks. If they saw blank spots, the guards certainly would have come back. They didn't. We crawled down a slope. As we got toward the bottom, there was a beautiful little town. It was called, I learned later, it was called Reichenbach. A nice little village. But as we got closer to it, I was crawling, trying to walk, but crawled most of the time. We got close to it. Suddenly, I heard the sounds that we had heard on the battlefield. The tanks, the sounds of tanks. And then we got closer and saw there were tanks. And there were soldiers. We had escaped to a German staging area where the troops were being trained and getting ready to go into combat. The order had been issued, as I mentioned, take no prisoners, no American or British prisoners alive. So if they saw us, we would have been shot. We had to crawl through back alleys. In the distance, I see a little white house. Something looked quaint about that house. And I said to the other 2, I said, that's a safe house. How do you know? I don't know, but I know. Luck, instinct. We crawled through alleys. We got to that house. I knocked. I pounded on the door. An elderly man comes to the door, and he looks at us, and he smiles. What are you smiling about? We looked terrible. We were filthy, dirty. My hair had been shaved. The only thing the Germans did for me during the entire time was to shave my head because I had lice. It was cold. Lice don't thrive in temperature like that, but somehow I contracted lice. They were all over my body. But I still have scars today from that. But anyway, hair was shaved. We were emaciated already, and our clothes were tattered. But nevertheless, the man comes out on the porch. He doesn't see any German soldiers around. He motions for us to come in. His wife comes. Again, luck. They speak English. Not only that, some years earlier, they had gone to see friends. They were either friends or relatives, I don't recall. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They built up a strong, strong feeling for America. That's what he was smiling at. This little thin jacket I had a U.S. emblem on it. Yeah, it's on there. A U.S. emblem on it. So he knew we were Americans. And he was willing, they were willing to sacrifice their own lives, perhaps. They took a chance and brought us in. She ran to the kitchen. She came out with 3 bowls. There was soup. We hadn't had anything like this in months. There was soup and there was a little piece of meat. I couldn't take food. I gagged on the meat and couldn't take it at all. But the soup I was able to pour down. It was delectable, obviously. They tell us the story about being in America. But we can't keep you here. If we're caught, we will be killed as traitors. And so they drew a map to a barn, a nearby barn. We could hear Allied shell fire, so we knew we were not that far away from the American troops. We had gotten that far west. We crawled to that barn and crawled up somehow into the hayloft. We were there 2-3 days, and I'm looking through a little crack. I could see down an alleyway, and I see soldiers. Oh, the night before, there was a lot of scurrying on around town. And what we assumed, and which turned out to be so, the Germans pulled out, meaning that Allied troops were nearby. And sure enough, so I see these men go by. I see the helmets. They don't look like German helmets. They look like ours. It must be Americans. And then a few minutes later, a vehicle goes by. It's an American Jeep. And there was a star, a white star on the hood. No question about it. American troops were there. We crawled down the hayloft, crawled down the alleyway to the waiting troops. We were the first Americans that they had come across as they proceeded eastward. They cradled us and tried to give us food. I couldn't take any food at all. They saw my right foot. They rushed me to a field hospital. The kind of hospital, you see, if any of you watch the television show MASH, that kind of a field hospital. They took me there. I believe I had, at times, I lost consciousness at times. I was really not conscious of what was going on. And I believe they took me to that field hospital. And that's where they cut off the bottom of my right foot. Gangrene had already set in. And they probably may well have saved a leg, if it had gone on much longer, but sooner or later, I think they would have caught it. Anyway, I was treated there, then on to the First General Hospital in Liège, Belgium, and then from there, First General Hospital in Paris, France. When I got to the hospital in Liège, Belgium, though, the notice was issued by the War Department, listing, and I was on that notice, that I was alive and being cared for at an American hospital in Belgium. Remember I mentioned before that there was a German radio, and there was an American radio operator that issued a request, if you see this name again, please let me know. So that name was issued, and somebody did send the name to that person who had requested it, who started the search. He got the notice, and as I mentioned before, he sat down and he typed a letter to parents. And this, as I said, is the original letter. The letter was written by my brother, my older brother, 8 years older than I, the then man, and when a teenager, the one who took care of me, raised me from the day I was born. My father worked nights. This same brother of mine, the one who, again, shaped my career, in a sense, was the one who discovered me alive. And he's the one who wrote that letter. Now, of all the incidents that occurred, I've been told a number of times, of all the incidents, most, and you've seen some of the movies of incidents that were most unusual in World War II, some of them have said, the odds against anything like this happening are infinitesimal. And probably it has to be one of the most unusual stories to come out of World War II. But that's the way it was. Ultimately, I was released from the hospital in Paris, flown in a hospital plane across the Atlantic, landed at a small airfield in upper New York State, and then was rushed to Howland General Hospital on Staten Island. When I got to the hospital, they weighed me. I had weighed 155. I was in the best condition of my life, which is why I survived. And all muscle, very little fat, but 155 when I went in. When I got to the hospital, they weighed me. I weighed 89 pounds. You've seen pictures of emaciated people, many of those who survived the concentration camps. There is a picture of me, and you may want to look at it later. And this is 2 months after I got to the American hospital. And so my cheeks have now emerged from where they were. But you can still see very, very thin. In the hospital, I came in, I was critical, so I was in a private room. My parents came as soon as they could. They almost when I got there. They pushed the door open. They looked at me, closed the door, and they walked on. They didn't recognize me. The characteristics had changed so much. Relatives of mine came by too. They all did the same thing. They looked inside. That wasn't me. They kept walking on down. And that went on for a while. I was being treated with all kinds of medications. Eventually got well enough to get out onto the ward and to meet with other soldiers. When I was able to, you have to think this way. Every American who came back, man or woman, everyone who came back from the war was a hero. Because I had lived through and survived Nazi atrocities, I was set aside as something a little bit more than that. And I was interviewed at bedside by Stan Lomax. Does that name familiar? Anybody here? I don't think anybody's old enough. Stan Lomax, he was the #1 announcer at the time. He came in a bedside interview. That interview was picked up at the college that I had gone to before the war. The students had been in the room. It was Saturday afternoon, and they hear the interview, and the name is Robert Mack, and so they knew that I was alive. But it had changed my whole life. It is where I met my wife. Had that not happened, had that interview happened, I never would have gone back and became part of what was called the Hillel Foundation. It was a Jewish organization that gave Jews on campuses throughout America an opportunity to experience some of the Jewish, some of the religious part, some of the community part of life that they did have when they were at home. I'm being shut off. Am I okay? Anyway, the rest of my life was all shaped in two ways. First, I had many, many sleepless nights in the hospital. I lay awake, and I started to reason. There was something emotionally that was tugging at me. Didn't know what it was at the time. But then I realized, you should have been dead. Many times, you weren't. There had to be a reason. And that reason was that you will perform. The rest of your life, you're going to perform services to people who are in need. Human services. And that's what I did. And I tie that in with, again, this going back to the Hillel Foundation, Ohio University, where I had gone before the war. When I got back to the university, the group of students there had heard that broadcast, Dan Womack's broadcast. So when I came back, everybody was a hero, remember? But I was a hero's hero because I had been a slave laborer and went through all that torture and everything. And so they found me, I was in a rooming house before we opened the fraternity again. And I was just walking on campus. 2 or 3 students come up to me and said, "Are you Robert Max?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "Would you come with us?" "Where? Where to?" "We're going to the Hillel House." Hillel? Yeah. "Why?" "Well, we just elected you president." I tell you that because it tells you again something about the American people, all held in such high regard. So they did take me to Hillel House. And all the students were there, they greeted me, and they ushered me into a room. There were a lot of papers. And behind those papers, there was a nice young lady, the lady who would have become president had I not come back to campus. Anyway, she's very nice. Her name is Shirley. Some of you that might mean something. Her name is Shirley. I say, "Shirley, I don't know, why me? I don't know, I don't know anything about Hillel." I said, "I've never led an organization before. Would you help me?" And a few of you here who knew her. And Shirley looks at me, she smiles, "Of course." That was the beginning of 67 years of marriage and partnership. It turned out that somehow there was a destiny that we were to be brought together, and we did serve together. Much of it, in leadership roles, many organizations that served humankind and did provide many people with better lives. And it was both of us who were honored by, again, Jewish Federation, the Greater Metro West New Jersey, the organization under which serves as an umbrella for many social service agencies. But that began the life. Shirley did pass away 2.5 years ago. And with her, a good part of my life. But it was the greatest life anyone could have imagined. And so I did. For the rest of my days, up until now, continue to serve in many different roles, developed organizations, but they're all designed for one purpose in a variety of ways and formats, to help those people who were in need. There was a book I read while I was writing myself, and it was called, it was by Frankl. Man's search for pardon?
Man's search for meaning.
Man's search for meaning. Yes, by Viktor Frankl. Right. And the mission in life, as he noted, was it that we create meaning in our own lives by helping others discover the meaning of their lives. And it was at that time that I discovered that, in a way, more sophisticated than I thought of it, but it was what we were doing and what we devoted the rest of our lives to. And when I was turned, and that was the life, and that made our lives. It was the best part of I guess, everything that I ever did in life. When I was turning 93, my wife was not only my inspiration, but she was my conscience. She said, Bob, you were the only, the historians have told you, made it very clear, you were the only American alive who lived through that kind of an experience. It's an important part of World War II, Battle of the Bulge, American history. The only time the public will have an opportunity to know what happened to American soldiers, the atrocities forced upon ordinary American soldiers by the Nazis during that period. And so, she encouraged me to do that. She was my conscience, as I said, and my guide, and I wrote the book. And so all that I've told you, plus a good deal more, is in that book. And I'm glad, I'm so glad, of course, obviously thank you to her for having done it. Why, and why did I write it? One other side incident, and then we'll move toward the conclusion. In 1988, much earlier, years earlier, we had driven through that area. Because we both came from that university in this little town in Athens, Ohio, we felt that it created a life for us. We decided we would set up a foundation at the university. It did. And there was a committee that managed it. They had senators and congressmen come year after year. One year, they sent an invitation to Elie Wiesel. I presume that many of you, I would hope Elie Wiesel, would ring a bell with you. He became the resource, having lived and survived, having lost his entire family in a concentration camp. But he lived. In 1986, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1988, the committee had invited him to come to Ohio University. Oh, he'll get another degree. He had so many already. I don't know why that would be attractive at all. But anyway, for some reason, he did come to the university. Shirley and I spent a weekend alone with him in the president's guest house. And try to imagine, this man is the voice of the Holocaust. Lost his entire family. Wrote more than 40 books. The most famous one, who knows that? Night, which was an account of what went on in the camps and how the Jews were gassed and burnt in ovens and in what were presumed to be showers. And his was the voice of the Holocaust. And so, greatly impressed by that time we spent with him, where we got from his own lips what he wrote later in that book, Night. And that was an inspiration. It took me a while to get around to it. But then I was silent for 53 years. Not uncommon. Many people who went through the extremes that I did never wanted to talk about it. I was not emotionally or psychologically damaged in any way. I just didn't think people cared to know that much about it. And they didn't talk. But after spending that time with him, and then listening to two of my grandsons, then 9 and 11 years old, when they asked, Poppy, were you in the war? No, I had never talked about it. Were you in the war? Where did you sleep? What did you eat? Did you have a gun? Did you ever carry it? Did you ever fire it? Did you ever shoot anybody? It was then that I thought, and I hooked up with our Holocaust counselor, and they asked me to speak. For the last dozen years, I've been speaking, mostly to students in our high schools. And as you know, you may know, Holocaust education is mandated in New Jersey. And so I do go out and I speak. I've spoken to thousands and thousands of these young people. I have hundreds and hundreds of letters, masterful, what the impression that is made upon them. And so, when Shirley suggested, oh, you got to write about it, it sounded to me as though it was right. And I started to write. And I guess I spent the better part of 2 years putting stuff together. And I did so in the hopes that it would carry out what Elie Wiesel was talking about, and with so many survivors. I come across many, many survivors of the Holocaust camps. Again, many of them who have lost their own families, many who survived somehow the treatment. And I think you get some of that feeling in the book. But I did write it in the hope that it will find its way to the homes of so many, many people, particularly those people with young children. That's the audience I reach in the high schools, because almost certainly the world is not through with Adolf Hitlers. There may well be dictators in the future who have similar ideas. And if there's nobody there to tell the populations in America and in the world what happens when a dictator is allowed to run rampage over his nation, maybe the world again, no voice to counter it, then it happens again. And so, there is a passage in the book that I want to read. When I speak to the youngsters in our schools, at the end, I give them what amounts to an assignment. Well, they're used to that anyway, so this is your assignment. You heard things here today. Sometimes I go out, there are two of us to speak to the students. One whose family was lost or who was interned in a concentration camp. So these young people get these two stories. And I always invariably end with something along these lines. And I urge you to remember what you heard here today and to speak to others years in the future so that there will always be voices carrying the memories, voices of reason that will stand as deterrents to any future atrocities. And so that's the primary reason, the reason. It was what motivated me, and Shirley was right. Because without this story that I've told you, there will not be anybody, and it will never be, it will be lost in history, and it should not be. And so, there are books for sale. I don't know where they will be, somewhere in the back, or we will have, I think, they're little printed cards. If you would like, you can order them directly from the publisher of this book. You can order them on the internet. Or you can go to Amazon or your local bookstore. Or you can borrow a book from the library. But anyway, I would urge you to get your hands on the book. And the reason is, again, that in each home there's a resource so that the generations in the future, your children, your children's children, and theirs, will always have something that will remind them that things happened to Americans that should never happen again. And with that, I would tell you that
Are there any questions?
Oh, I just wanted to tell you, in case you wanted to see, I was young. When I went into the war, I was young and defiant. On my dog tags, there was a J for Jewish. Some had an H for Hebrew. Some were, in fact, we were told, if you are captured, destroy your dog tags. If they discover you're Jewish, your treatment will be worse. Mine could not have been worse. But nevertheless, again, young, defiant. I attached, when I went to the base in Fort Dix, I got hold of, and I attached to my dog tags, a Star of David, an obvious Jewish symbol, and a miniature of what we call a mezuzah, what we hang on our doorposts. Some of you know that. And this is a miniature one. I wore them in combat and captivity. And that's what youth will do for you. And also, again, if you want to see the classic Little Brown Book, it's up here too, so you can come and examine those. Short of that, Rebecca, okay, do you want questions?
Question? Go ahead.
Did you ever go back and reach any of your captives?
The captives.
The people who captured you?
Oh, well, I didn't know anything by name. You mean the Germans? The German soldiers?
Yes.
I would have loved to go back. This German sergeant, who was supposed to kill me, I always wanted to go back. I realized the odds of ever finding him, which I had no idea what his name was, no way that I would. The elderly couple, though, I did want to go back to that elderly couple who actually did save my life. They lived in Reichenbach, and I thought about it. And then when I finally came to the reality that, yeah, I got to go back, I realized they were very old people. And if I go back now, they can't be alive. They wouldn't be alive. I did go back, though, to Omaha Beach with my wife. We stood up above Omaha Beach. I looked down at it. Some of you may have been. You have. In fact, gee, I had a call one morning. Gentleman sitting here said, Bob, he happened to be my neighbor. He said, Bob, I'm calling you from Omaha Beach. I said, you have to be out of your mind. What do you mean, Omaha Beach? That's only, yeah. And the two of you, your wife and you were there on Omaha Beach. And he reminded me about it. Yes, we had been there years earlier. And I stood up on top looking down on the beach, which was a battlefield when I was there. And people were sitting on the beach, umbrellas. They were bathing in the water. And it was an incongruous scene. Because here are people in the water, some swimming, some bathing, and just beyond them are big, huge hunks of steel. The ships, and I believe they remain there today. And it was so incongruous. So we did go back there, but never did go back anywhere else. So I keep wishing that I'd gone back, found that elderly couple, and then realized it was too late, probably.
Are there any other questions?
Just real quick question. Churchill was offered the opportunity to 400,000 survivors to go fight and turn them down.
I didn't hear the question. There were 400,000?
There were 400,000 Jewish fighters
Mm-hmm.
who wanted to join up and fight the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
Churchill
There were 400,000 Israelis who were drafted. Israelis were drafted into the British Army. And they did fight with the British in the war. And that's very, very little known. Right? You know that. Very few do know. So Israelis, having enough to worry about in their own land, came and fought in that war on the side of the Allies. Yes, very much, very true. Any other?
Any other questions? Oh, okay, quick question here. Go ahead.
You have, and thank you for these stories. What was it like going right from campus to combat training? Was it a shock?
When what?
At the very beginning, when you got to combat training right from campus.
Was it a shock? The cadre there, the men who trained us, were old. Some of them had fought in World War I. Some of them had been in battle in North Africa. And here is a bunch of young smart aleck college kids coming down. And they were going to really put us through the hoops. They did, thank goodness. They made the obstacle courses so tough. There was an English professor from my university who was allowed to leave the military because he couldn't take the obstacle courses, and he almost passed away. But yes, there was the final test by these guys was to take us with all of our equipment on our backs to go across what they called Bain Gap. It was a big mountain. And forced march, temperature hovering around 100 degrees, full uniform, backpack, gas mask, rifle. And we all came through. Wow. They said, can't happen. They made us go over that mountain again. At the end of which, they put us out on the parade grounds where we had to stand. Just stand under the hot sun, 100-degree temperatures. They wanted us to wilt. I felt faint. I was young. I said, I'm just not going to drop. I didn't. I don't even remember the march back to the barracks. But when I did get back to the barracks, I dropped on my bed. I was really out. I attribute that as a contribution, though, to my survival. You have to understand the conditions under which many died, under the conditions in which we lived. And I survived, and I think one of the reasons for the way those bad guys treated us during basic training. In fact, it was combat training. Okay, any other
questions? Back first.
Were your captors SS or just regular German Army?
I'm sorry?
Were your captors SS or just the regular German Army?
No, they were regular German Army. I don't believe there were any SS troops. They were assigned to more specific kinds of activities. A lot of it on the home front, but I'm not sure the SS were even in combat. I just don't know. But these were regular soldiers. I should point out, incidentally, that the gentleman sitting here is John Kaiser. And John is the one who called me. Surprisingly, I think I only met you maybe one time by that time. And he picks up the phone, Omaha Beach. And I thought he was kidding me. I thought it was some, I get crazy calls, we all do. And all that. And I said, this is some crazy call. He said, no, John Kaiser. And sure enough, it was John. And then we've been very, very good friends ever since that time. It was a call unlike any I've ever gotten before or ever will, I'm sure.
We have another question here.
Did you play any swing music after the war?
After the war?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I did come back, and I went back to college, and we had a great big swing band. What I liked about it most was that we wore tuxedos. Now try to imagine that in today's environment, musical environment. All tuxedo, and there were 16 pieces in the band. And it was a great, great experience, and I did play. I played symphonic band also, and the symphony orchestra, and really devoted a lot of time to music then. But I have to tell you, one quickly. Now, years go by. I had been playing here. I went off to college. I went to war for 3 years. I was in civilian life now for about 2 years. I get a call one night and pick up the phone. Bob, yeah, this is Johnny Lee. Johnny Lee? Oh, Johnny Lee, yeah. Can you make rehearsal Thursday night? Now this is, I don't know, 10, 11 years later. Can you make, I said, Johnny, you gotta be out of your mind. No, I don't play anymore. But how could you suddenly call me up and ask me to come to a rehearsal that I haven't been with in 11 years? And that was the strangest phone call I've ever had. Dear. Anyway, those things did happen. And
Okay, well, thank you.
Any other
questions? Oh, here, one more question.
How long were you in the internment camp before the forced march? And was Stalag, the movie Stalag 17 accurate?
oh, no, the forced march. You mean as a captive?
Yes, yes.
Oh, we marched regularly. Half the time I spent was on the road. And we had to be marched from one area to another, one bombed out railroad to another. We were, well, as soon as I was entered into slave labor, we slept that first night outdoors, which was a shock that this is the way, I couldn't believe the way we would be treated. But I think maybe a couple of those marches, and then we were automatically into the slave labor. That was it. And then between locations where we were into forced marches. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Max, thank you very much.